My Govan, and this is the Tolkien Shed talking, and I have seen the controversial episode 3 of The Rings of Power. Peaceful Orcs? That sounds like an oxymoron. If you want to hear my full take on the subject, go to the timestamp on the screen. But make sure to see the rest, as there is much more to dissect. Let's go!
Welcome back to the adventures of Berek the Brave Horse. Today we see our valiant hero that has returned into the shadow of Mordor and bravely scours the ruins of the village to find his master Isildur. Unfortunately, he happens to encounter a party of hungry orcs. But he is not one to fear the monsters. It is them who should be afraid of him. Despite their efforts, he breaks free, killing 2 of them and escapes. They don't follow him because, as we are informed, Berek went to the Black Forest from which nothing returns alive. Thank you Orcs for blunt exposition, and thank you Berek for yet another thrilling adventure. But what's that? Berek is not done yet. He seems to have found the most evil place in the forest, a cave surrounded by bones of various less lucky beings. Anger boils in Berek's heart, and he enters the cave to face the darkness and avenge every creature that fell before him. For a time, it seems that only darkness and spider cobwebs can be found there, but as Berek goes deeper and deeper, he encounters a track of someone very familiar. What is that in the shadow? Could it be Berek's master, his ever-fickle rider, Isildur, whom everybody presumed dead and definitely not expected to see ever again? Yes, that's him, in the flesh! But as 2 old friends rejoice, it becomes clear that the danger is not over. Isildur is covered in webs and cannot move, and menacing sounds are heard from the shadows. Suddenly, a great deal of spiders attack our heroes. But nothing can break Berek's spirit. He kicks the wall and releases Isildur's hand so that he can break free while his 4-legged companion fends off the monsters. Isildur grabs a sword conveniently situated right nearby, but then a giant spider appears and blocks his way. Isildur manages to wound it and rides off on the back of his most trusted friend. Tune in next week to see what is the next adventure in the way of brave Berek the Horse. The whole sequence with Berek caught me so off guard that I couldn't stop myself and reported it in the most outlandish way that I could think of. I've never expected to follow the adventures of a lonesome horse and to be more invested in them than in the adventures of most of the characters of the show. Now, let's quickly analyze it. Isildur's death was such an obvious misdirection that his return was never in doubt. But the fact that he had to be saved by a horse seems too abstract to be true. And it generates a lot of questions. How did Isildur survive? How did he get out of the village? How long did he survive in the spider's pit? How come that Berek is so awesome and powerful? And finally, how did Berek find Isildur? For this last one, I think I have an answer. Berek obviously has the power that many characters of the show have, and he can read the script. Alright, so I don't think that we learn anything about Isildur in this sequence, except the fact that he is alive. Nobody expected that. But regarding Berek, he is fearless and loyal. And to his abilities we can add that he is skilled in kicking and reading the script. So of course we should also add that he can read. Then we go to Númenor and witness the funeral of the old king. We see Elendil and his daughter Aryen, who says that he isn't to blame for Isildur's death. We later learn that she blames the queen. Then Miriel arrives and Elendil assists her as she is now blind. Apparently he is the queen's most trusted servant. Then some woman comes and slaps Miriel. She blames the queen for the loss of her son. Before she is impaled by the gods and we have another funeral, the queen embraces her in the gesture of regret and empathy. Which is quite noble of her, but doesn't serve her authority. You simply shouldn't be able to slap the queen, or any other official for that matter, and get away with it. But perhaps it is not the queen who should be blamed, but her useless gods. If the woman felt a bit more vengeful, she would have killed the queen without any issue. Then we see Miriel in her chambers, inspecting her late father's belongings. She is visited by Pharazôn, and she hides her father's bracelet. We learn that soon there will be her coronation, and that sometimes an eagle comes to attend the occasion, and that it is seen as a good omen. Then we see Pharazôn, Kemen, Aryen, and one of the Númenorian lords, Pharazôn's ally, eating dinner.
They quite openly discuss how weak the queen is and that Pharazôn has a claim to the throne. Arryn suggests that she might have information that would convince people to depose the queen and elevate Pharazôn to the throne. Remembering how easy it was to convince Númenóreans that the elves would take their jobs, and the next day to follow an elf that led them to war, I have no doubt that Númenóreans can be talked into doing anything. But before Arryn shares her secret, to their table comes Valandil, one of the two Isildur's friends, whom you can recognize by the fact that he is alive. Rest in peace, Ontamu. Valandil steps in, and apparently he heard everything, which tells us that Pharazôn wasn't very cautious with his discussion, that from a mile away smells like treachery. This is quite contradictory to his previous behavior. Valandil demands that the queen be given respect, as she was ready to sacrifice her life for the soldiers. He then insults Kemen and leaves. Arryn proceeds with the story. At the same time, we see the queen who enters the secret room in her tower. It turns out that the bracelet that she hid from Pharazôn was the key to the chamber. Palantir is gone. As we later learn, it was Arryn who took it. So now we know that Miriel trusts Elendil, she is forgiving and distrustful of Pharazôn. And Pharazôn is not so careful anymore. Then we visit Mordor once again, and we see an orc that is worried and doesn't want to go to war. He shares his worries with Ada, and then we see that he has a wife and a child to take care of. An orc with a family that doesn't want to go to war. Where do I even begin? Let's start by analyzing what the show is trying to tell us. What other purpose could showing a peaceful family have than to garner sympathy for the said family and by extension to other orcs? This is going a step further than episode 1. We are explicitly shown that some orcs do not want to go to war and would rather live peacefully and take care of their families. The problem with that isn't inherently that Tolkien described orcs in a different manner. It is that the show presented them from an irredeemable perspective. And now it wants us to pity the creatures that so far have been shown as nothing but vile, sadistic and plainly evil monsters. But look at them now, they are so cute. Oh, sorry, wrong clip. Sorry again. Sorry. Oh, there's that. One happy family. I could go on, but most of what I want to say I already said in my episode 1 review. So I'll just summarize by saying, Amazon, you don't get to change our attitude towards the orcs. Once you presented them as blood-craving beasts with no morals, you don't get to present them as equal moral agents to other creatures of Middle-earth. Blood-craving beasts they remain. We then see a troll that comes to join Ada's forces. Then we see Durin and Disa in Eregion. This confirms that the dwarves can have contact with the outside world. We still have no reason for the king's refusal to trade with the outsiders. Apparently, Durin came of his own accord and the invitation was addressed to him. I find it strange that he can leave and negotiate without his father's knowledge or approval, but let's leave that aside for the moment. We hear that Celebrimbor offers rings for the dwarves in exchange for mithril, and Anata, Sauron, is beside him. Celebrimbor says that the rings, and more specifically mithril, may have the power to heal the dwarves' mountain, and that is another example of incompetent world building. I complain about the elves and their light fading in almost every video. This is a comparable problem. And before you remind me that I praise the show for depicting the problems that the dwarves have in the previous episode, I am well aware of what I said. The problems that the dwarves have are grounded, pun intended. They have no food, no way of clearing the sun shafts, and the techniques that they use are failing them. That I don't have a problem with. It is the solution that Celebrimbor proposed that is simply absurd. It was already a stretch that mithril could save the elves, but there was an attempt, a very poor one, to explain it. The light of Valinor was retained in mithril, and it was the very light that the elves needed. The elves, not dwarves. Dwarves are fine. How is it supposed to help them? And don't they have mithril in abundance under the mountain? What do the rings offer them? How would they be useful? How is healing a magic tree in Lindon comparable to healing the mountain? But the dwarves ask no such questions. Durin says that he and his father are not talking to each other, so he is of little help. This also means that apparently Disa wasn't as successful as I thought after the previous episode. Then Anata says that bringing a means to saving the Dwarven Kingdom could be a way to get King's inheritance back for Durin. Now is the time to ask, how does Anata know all of this? He apparently is just aware of the problems that the dwarves have. He also knows that Durin lost his inheritance. How exactly? As is usual, we get no answer. Durin then asks who Annatar is. Anatar tries to sell him the story that he knows Elrond well and that he spoke very fondly of Durin. But Durin doesn't trust him. As we learn from his later conversation with Disa, he is distrustful of the claims that Elrond praised him in the way Anatar described. Answering Anatar's claims about his inheritance, Durin says that his father will never hear the proposition from the elves as he will never present it to him as they are not on speaking terms. But when they leave for a moment, Disa condemns Durin's pride and says that if there is a chance to save the mountain, they must present it to the king, and if Durin won't do it, she will. Then we see Anatar and Celebrimbor talking. Anatar claims that there is no time to waste and that the dwarven rings should be made immediately. Well, first of all, you would have more time if you haven't pretended to be a Southlander and then run away. But Celebrimbor, I guess, will never ask about this part of his story. Secondly, Anatar's reason for being in a hurry is really suspicious. He claims that Gil-galad doesn't believe the dwarves to be worthy of such power and forbid the creation of any more rings, and that Anatar has arrived in secrecy without king's knowledge. They need to act quickly before the king realizes the truth. This should really put a doubt in Celebrimbor's heart. His king and Galadriel alike have both rejected the authority of the messenger of the Valar. Why was it so? Should he consult them and learn about their concerns? But instead, Anatar's plan seemingly worked. Celebrimbor is angered that the king would interfere with his plans and decides to act against his will. He says that his actions are not the king's business, which couldn't be further from the truth as the king is his sovereign, and so far Celebrimbor has been acting on his orders. Now, Celebrimbor sends a letter to the king and says that the forge will be closed and that he will go to Lindon. So, basically, Celebrimbor, from a loyal subject, becomes a traitor and a liar in a matter of one conversation. Great character writing. Alright, so Disa is loyal to the king and can be critical of Durin. Durin is suspicious and distrustful of Anatar, and Sauron is diplomatic and reads the script, but that's not a first for him. And finally Celebrimbor, he's extremely trustful, rebellious, he's a liar and a traitor. Nothing of that we would expect from his previous characterization. From my point of view, he's a broken character. Then we see Isildur, who is attacked by a young woman who mistakes him for an orc. She stabs him in the thigh before they see that they are not enemies. Her name is Estrid, she is from the Southlands and she tends Isildur's wound. She informs him that the Númenóreans left the camp to which Isildur was heading, but that they left a map to Pelargir. So, now, there is a map that somebody left. Best faith interpretation is that it was left so that others can follow it with the hope that no orc does so, and it would mean that Estrid took it and now nobody can find the place where they should head to find safety. Secondly, the show, even when it introduces the map, does not inform us where exactly our characters are, but it would seem that in order to reach Pelargir from the camp, Estrid had to go back to Mordor, because that's where she is now. It would mean that all the Southlanders had to go this way as well, but we had no mention of that. It seems quite problematic. Then the show does the classic teleportation trick, and in the next scene, the unyielding Berek the horse, bearing now 2 riders, appears in the forest near Pelargir. Then they see an old man lying by the road. He says that he was ambushed by the orcs. As they try to help him, Isildur sees Addar's mark on his hand, and suddenly other men appear out of nowhere and attack them. So it was an ambush. But wouldn't you know it, it was a double ambush, because suddenly there appears Arondir. He shoots most of the bandits, but 3 of them escape on 3 horses, one of which is Berek, whom they have stolen, and other 2 just materialize because they were nowhere in sight before. Everything in this scene appears out of nowhere. Arondir, the horses, and then the bandits who seemingly multiply. The numbers do not add up. The old man is meant to lure the prey, and we see 3 others jumping out of the cart. That's 4 in the beginning, but later we see that there was at least 6 of them. 3 rode away on 3 horses, and others were killed by Arondir. At least 3, although I could be easily convinced that there was more of them, but maybe those who were severely wounded by him just forgot about the dire condition, attacked him again, and then got killed. Learn to count, Amazon. After the skirmish ends, Isildur wants to go save Berek, but Arondir says that he won't help him, so Isildur follows the elf to Pelargir. Then in the night we see Bronwyn's funeral. She looked fine when we last saw her, but as we learn later, her wounds got worse and she died. Behind the scenes information confirms that the actress decided to leave the show. I know that it is some unpredicted circumstance, but this makes Arondir's and Bronwyn's romance so insignificant that it becomes almost a joke. A pair of lovers from the two races is something that happened only 4 times in the lore. From the beginning, it was an unnecessary and lore-breaking move to insert another relationship of that sort here. Now it seems just hollow because no meaningful story was told. And it is not as if they couldn't recast her. They did it with Ada, but here apparently they decided to abandon the storyline and run with something different. The scene itself has no dialogue, which makes it one of the best in the show. It shows us Arondir's and Theo's grief, accompanied by some well-placed emotional tune which reuses Bronwyn's theme. So now we know that Bronwyn is dead, Isildur is helpful, Arondir is bitter, and Theo is angry. Then in Khazad-dûm we see Durin, who finally appears before his father, proving that he is in fact the one who is less proud and ready to apologize. He says that he was wrong and that he is sorry. We get another interesting moment between these two characters. The king is cold, says that Durin looks terrible, and Durin responds that the miners were harsh on him, and the king responds, "Wait till your children grow up," suggesting that he considers Durin's previous behavior to be extremely hurtful. Durin also presents Celebrimbor's offer, stating that he believed it was his duty to bring it before the king. But then he says that he doesn't trust this offer and informs the king that he feels that something is wrong. He also mentions that now he considers his father's argument that maybe they should have let the elves die to be possibly true. And that is a complete change to his previous convictions without anything that would justify it. So, Durin is humbler than his father, is loyal, and apparently now he believes that the elves should have left Middle-earth. And his father was deeply hurt by his son's comments. Then we are back in Pelargir, where Arondir tries to teach Theo, who is understandably depressed after his mother's death and full of anger. He tries to teach him that anger is not the way, that it is a path to the dark side, a wrong universe, that it doesn't lead anywhere good. But Theo says that he doesn't want to know Arondir. He rejects his aid and the proposition of becoming the town's healer. Then Isildur talks to Theo. They talk a bit about Númenor. Isildur is asked why he didn't stay there, and he answers that he heard that there were greater things in Middle-earth. I thought that he wanted to go to war to do something worthy of Númenor, but I guess that's not true. Or he's lying here. You never know with Isildur, he has so many changing motivations that it's anyone's guess. Then Theo asks if Isildur wants to get his horse back. Apparently he knows where Berek is, and tells Isildur to meet him at night. As the night falls, we see Isildur, who talks to Estrid, while Theo accidentally comes close enough to eavesdrop. They talk about the Survivor's Guild. Isildur tells the story of his mother's death, that she saved him from the sea, but I thought that the sea is always right, but drowned herself. He also says that he never told anyone that she saved him, that the guilt he feels is a terrible pressure. I quite like this scene, it explores the characters a bit, shows us their perspective, their suffering in very dark circumstances, but sometimes it's just a bit much when the character spits out his entire motivation. Such is the case with Isildur, when he admits that ever since his mother died he had wanted to do something special to prove his worth. It is a fine motivation to have, but it doesn't have to be presented so bluntly. He says that he wanted to, in some way, earn his mother's sacrifice, and Estrid tells him that it is impossible, that the sacrifice must be accepted as a gift. This is, honestly, not an idea I expected to hear from the show, but a good idea nevertheless. I liked this scene for the large part. As Theo comes and lives with Isildur, we see then Estrid alone. It turns out that she has Ada's mark on her neck and tries to burn her skin so it is not visible. I get that she doesn't want it, but it's not like she would be cast out or killed if somebody found out. If she hadn't taken the mark, she would have died. I don't think that anybody could reasonably blame her for taking it, so there is not much reason to burn it out. It isn't a mark that you are evil, although the show treats it so. Then Theo brings Isildur to a camp of the Southlanders who took Berek. I would ask how did he know where to find them, but we obviously won't get an answer. He just knew where to look for them and never told anyone that the bandits may camp there. It's not like it could save lives. As Isildur frees Berek, the bandits become suspicious of the noise. But then Theo distracts them by coming out of the forest and asking them if he could sit by their fire. In order to gain their trust, he shows them the mark that was made by the magical sword and claims to be one of them and to be serving Ada. So he assumes that they serve Ada. How does he know that? Reading the scripts again? Why would the mark mean anything? Everything depends on the person that bears it. But it turns out that he is right and they are loyal to Ada for some reason. I guess that they just really like living in the beautiful place that is Mordor and being slaves. The men notice that Theo's marks is different, they also see that he is well fed, and they conclude that he is from Pelargir. We learn that they accuse the people of Pelargir of attacking their other camps. Before we learn more, a flying axe kills one of them, and a fight ensues. Then Theo is grabbed from the above and screams for help. We don't yet see what took him. As a matter of fact, we don't see any attackers, but judging by the fact that we were explicitly shown a man trying to cut down a tree, and he was the first to be killed, judging by the characteristic sounds that we hear, and finally by what the trailer showed, you can safely assume that it is Ents. As Isildur hears Theo's cry for help, we end the scene. Alright, so Theo suffers from survivor's guilt, he reads the script, and he apparently does not care about the lives of others, as he didn't tell anyone where the bandits' camp is, but he cares for Isildur, he was ready to risk his life for him, so he is also brave. And Isildur gets a new motivation, he wanted to see great things in Middle-earth. He also suffers from survivor's guilt, and another motivation, he wants to earn his mother's sacrifice. Also, he is ready to risk his life for Berek, and I cannot blame him. Then, back in Númenor, we see the coronation. The queen enters, but there is a break of protocol when somebody shouts that she is unfit to rule and a liar. The queen once again seemingly accepts the criticism and sympathizes with the mourning of her people. But then Arien comes with the Palantir, she reveals it and says that the queen took counsel from it. It seems to cause an uproar because it is some elven magic. Everyone seems to know what it serves for and that it was made by the elves. Remind me, why exactly do Númenorians hate the elves? Could we get some of the history of the relationship? No? A shame. Arien throws the Palantir and then Pharazôn claims that the queen would never use it and orders to destroy it. But then the queen admits that it is hers and says that the whole Númenor needs it, which is probably the worst thing that she could have said at this occasion. Elendil tries to take the Palantir, but it magically throws him away. I wonder why and how, and if it will do the same to others, and if not, why is it so? Then the people start attacking Miriel, and in just a moment it seems she would have been killed. But then a great eagle shrieks and comes through the window. Then Pharazôn comes forth, close to the eagle, and someone shouts his name and claims that the eagle favors him. And the whole room agrees. So apparently, not only does a bird decide who can rule Númenor, but it is enough to come to it faster than the queen who is blind, and now you are the destined ruler. Yeah, that checks out. Regarding the significance of the eagle, I know that in the books the eagles are missives of the Valar, but I don't know that from the show. It fails to establish that. Without the proper setup, it seems simply as if the Númenorians liked big birds and accepted that they can somehow point out who can rule them. The whole thing is even funnier when we consider that the bird flies away after a few seconds of screaming at Pharazôn. I don't yet know what happens next in Númenor, but we have all the reasons to suspect that this scene is the breakthrough in Pharazôn's rise to power. And the scene relies on the eagle and Arien bringing the Palantir. The eagle is both Deus Ex Machina, arbitrary, so it's hard to praise, and it is also a signifier of how illogical and downright superstitious Númenorians are. Arien and Palantir storyline is not better. She was able to bring this vital artifact to the coronation only because the king was just insane enough to believe her to be Miriel and just lucid enough to open the secret door and tell her to go there. Not to mention that she was with him alone, which is a serious safety risk, and that after she called for help to come to assist the king, nobody came. In summary, Pharazôn's rise to power is unbelievably contrived. Alright, so what do we learn here? Pharazôn is an opportunist, and he is very lucky, although that is barely anything that would distinguish him, especially among all the characters with the insane plot armor. And now, Elendil, he is loyal to the queen, and queen herself, she is soft, she doesn't demand respect, and cannot read the room. Then we see the dwarves in Eregion and the creation of the 7 rings. So I guess that the extremely important conversation, the debate over the creation of the rings, all the doubts that Durin has, all the reasoning of his father, all other options that they have, the whole possible conflict, the council of other dwarf lords, well that just happens off screen. Great, what a significant moment, what a payoff to all the setup and the whole journey. Yeah, the king gives Celebrimbor a bit of mithril, and it is then taken by Anata. It is implicitly shown that he uses some magic on the shard so that it can later serve his purposes. If it is mithril that he needs to touch, then it means that the elven rings are also corrupted, because touching mithril is the first thing he did when he came to the forge, and he had many occasions later. Just remember that. So, with the melting of mithril, the episode ends. Alright, so in this final scene, or rather in all the preceding scenes, we could have learned so much about the dwarves, but as I have said, all the conversations happen off-screen, so the only thing that we can add is that Sauron touches things to corrupt them. So, summing up, extremely convenient circumstances lead to Pharazôn's rise to power. I would like to know, really, what would he do if he didn't know about the Palantir and if the eagle wouldn't come? We could have seen some actual scheming going on. Could you imagine? Moving on, most of the vital conversations in the Dwarves and Eregion storyline happen off-screen or don't happen at all. The Dwarven king doesn't agree to trade for grain, but when he is offered rings, he accepts them, even though there is no proof that they can help in his situation. Anatar is more and more suspicious, and Celebrimbor's allegiance to the High King is simply thrown out of the window. In Mordor we see that Orcs have family structures now and don't want to go to war. And the cherry on top of all these elements that already make the episode terrible, we get Isildur, who is rescued by his horse, the abandoned story of Bronwyn, and Theor reading the script. Here at least we get some good bits like the grief and meaningful conversations that give some life to the characters. And brave Berek the horse, who is now my favorite character in the whole series. Amazon, don't make a show about elves or men. You do horses much better. Alright, so there you have it. That's my review of episode 3. What do you think about the orcs, the orclings and the whole episode? Let me know in the comments. As for me, into the editing dungeon I go, and then on to the episode 4. I hope to see you again very soon. Fare you well, Nova Year. Then Theo asks if it... And finally by what the trailer shown, and finally by what the and finally by what the trailers show, and finally by what the trailer, and finally by what the trailers show, and finally by what the trailers show, and finally by what the trailers showed.
Subscribe right now, you little hobbitses.